Call this meeting of Lima City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Heavenly Father, we come before you this evening. We ask you to guide our hearts and our minds and help us to make good decisions for all the residents of the city of Lima, and good decisions for those that affect beyond the city of Lima. We ask you to guide our hearts and minds in positive ways. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
Mr. Lowe?
Here.
Mr. Tebben?
Here.
Miss Adams?
Here.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes, here.
Mrs. Miles?
Here.
And Mr. Nixon?
Here. There are no amendments this evening. First on the agenda is privilege of the floor. Mr. Jacob King, regarding concerns with Operation Quiet Resolve. Mr. King, I'd ask you to come forward, state your name and address for the record, and our rules allow for 3 minutes.
My name is Jacob King. My address is 739 Bryce Avenue here in Lima, 45801. I'm also here with my wife, Carla Thompson, and some members of our congregation are with us as well. And as you said, we'd like to speak about our concerns regarding what's been called Operation Quiet Resolve. This is a group of volunteer militia men and gunmen who are, quote, guarding the Social Security office and recruitment center. And we wanted to bring some concerns to the City Council about it. I did speak with one of the volunteer gunmen there, and I asked about what he might consider a threat as far as what he was guarding against. And I'm using his words here. He said that he needed to be prepared for a firefight with any Muslims or gangbangers. And I am not confident personally in this man or this group of men's ability to identify an extremist Muslim bent on terrorists. And frankly, I'm afraid that there's a likelihood that a young African-American man or woman might be mistaken for a gangbanger and shot and killed, as has happened several times throughout this country in the last few years. We have just a few other points to make.
One of the reasons that they do not carry weapons on these facilities is so that people do not feel like they live in a police state, and also because it creates an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. The Department of Defense has actually requested that these volunteer gunmen actually show their support in other ways, that they go home and show their support in other ways by doing things like supporting suspicious activity. And what we're concerned about is that the fact that the group here in Lima has decided that guns are the immediate and only way to show support is kind of disappointing and both a bit frightening. I have to go by this every day on my way to work, and it doesn't make me feel safe. It makes me feel afraid.
And our last point, I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher my entire career, and I have had the chance to look at and research something called the Safe School Initiative. This was prepared by the Department of Education and the United States Secret Service, and it was conducted in 2004 as a way to help schools deal with active shooter situations. Schools, like recruitment centers, as you know, do not allow the carrying of firearms. And one of the many things that study found was that things like armed gunmen and metal detectors do not actually statistically reduce the risk of an active shooter situation. Instead, what this report found was that things that do reduce the risk of an active shooter situation include programs that create a sense of community and accurate, viable, real threat assessment, which was not, as I said, exhibited by the gentleman I spoke with.
In conclusion, we would just like to know if there's anything that council can do to help us as concerned citizens end the occupation on West North Street. And if you cannot, if you can direct us as to what we can do as citizens to make it go away. We've been told, ignore it and it'll stop, they'll get bored. But I'd hate to have something horrible happen while we're waiting for them to get bored. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The consent calendar,
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that item A of the consent calendar be received, filed, and approved, and item B be received and filed.
Second. The motion and the second is that item A be received, filed, and approved, and item B be received and filed. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to place tax assessments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 1, receive and file, legislation on tonight agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Auditor regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Perry Protech.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 2 be received and filed, and the law director be authorized to prepare the necessary legislation.
Second. The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 2 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Ben's Construction.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 3 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 3. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Next on the agenda, reports of officials. Howard Elstro, traffic study.
Thank you, Mr. President and Council. At the July meeting of Council, it was requested that I look into the issue of requests for a traffic signal at the intersection of North Street and High Streets, also known as North Street and the former Tingle Avenue. I report to you that this intersection has been studied and reviewed by the Traffic Commission twice. Council and the community needs to be aware that each time a traffic study is requested, substantial and detailed information is collected, analyzed, and is the basis for the engineering recommendations. In 2005, as well as 2015, data for 8 various warrants were collected and examined. The warrants are as follows. 1, volume of traffic during an 8-hour period. 2, highest volume of traffic within a 4-hour period. 3, peak hour traffic volumes in unusual cases. 4, the pedestrian volume. 5, school crossings. 6, coordinated signal systems. 7, crash experience. And 8, roadway network. The first request for a traffic study was submitted by Eric Rose in 2005, a Lima Senior High School student, and then the second time it was referred to the Traffic Commission was in 2015 by Councilor Lowe. As submitted to you through the minutes of the Traffic Commission meetings in June 20th of 2005, City Engineer Kirk Niemeyer reported to the Traffic Commission the results of the study that none of the 8 warrants were met. The city engineer stated that the only malfunction was during dismissal, where cars leaving the school stacked up 4 or 5 deep at High Street. But they did continually move through the intersection. Mr. Niemeyer pointed out that there were no accidents and that most of the speeds were well within the acceptable range. The engineering recommendation, which was accepted by the Traffic Commission, was to deny the request for a traffic signal at this intersection. In the 2015 requested study, City Engineer Kirk Niemeyer attempted to widen the area of data collection to take into consideration not only North and High Street, but also the 2 private drives west of the North/High Street or Tingle intersection. Even with the inclusion of data from this wider study area, it is unable to sustain justification for a signal. The city engineer reported to the Traffic Commission on June 1st, 2015, that during the time span of 2005 to 2015, there has been relatively no change in traffic volumes. Again, during the most recent traffic study, the study area was increased to include 2 private drives, as I said, to Lima Senior, west of North Street and High Street intersection. Mr. Niemeyer stated that because the recorded volumes were so low and the data did not fulfill the requirements for a traffic signal, he did consider if a multi-way stop at the intersection of North Street and High Street was warranted. Let me walk you through those efforts. Step 1 in trying to justify a multi-stop intersection, has there been 5 or more crashes in a 12-month period at any one of the three drives, 2 private, 1 public, along North Street. There has been no crashes or no accidents at the intersection itself. During the past 3 years, there were only 2 accidents, and those were further up the street coming off of those auxiliary drives, and they were not caused by, the one was a rear end where somebody slowed down and somebody crashed into them, and so it had nothing to do with the intersection itself. In step 2, the volume on the major street, North Street, in the study area peaks between 4 and 5 p.m. with 940 vehicles. The volume during the dismissal hour between 3 and 4 o'clock was 778 vehicles. City engineer noted that the peak hour happens after school dismissal, which is an advantage to the Lima Senior High School. Mr. Niemeyer stated that the minor street had 71 vehicles per hour total during the dismissal hour, falling short of about half of what is required to justify a multi-way stop and or a signal. Mr. Niemeyer did notice from the data collected from the traffic study that the traffic speed is in the 85th percentile range, which is an average of 34 to 38 miles per hour. After further review of the data, it was found that there was little variance in speed during 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock hour compared to other hours of the day, even though the speed limit in the school zone is 20 miles per hour. This concern was initially brought to the traffic commissioner by Councilor Lowe because he or one of his constituents witnessed issues with people trying to leave the parking area of Lima Senior High School after a train blocked the Indiana-Ohio tracks to the east, causing backup of traffic. City engineer's observation noted that the train blocking and the school dismissal coinciding is not a daily occurrence, but does happen from time to time. In conclusion, empirical data collected from traffic counters, visual inspections by the engineering staff, analysis of the collection of accident reports, inspection of and review of speeds, and absence of pedestrians crossing at this intersection all went into the reasonable conclusion that a signalized intersection at North and High Street is not warranted. It is laudable that the Traffic Commission, who is charged with issues concerning traffic control, follow the protocol and directives that are in place set forth by the Manual for Uniform Control of Traffic Devices as much as practical. Having no support in data to demonstrate that a problem exists at this intersection, the Traffic Commission prudently concluded that signalization or additional traffic control devices at this section are unwarranted. The engineer did recommend the following to ensure a safe school zone. First, check all the school signage and ensure that it is appropriately placed. Second, check line striping, stop bars, and pavement markings to ensure that they are apparent and obvious. Thirdly, enforce school zone speeds at the beginning and dismissal times. And fourth, monitor this intersection going forward for changes that would substantiate warrants. Chief Kevin Martin notes that the Lima Police Department Chief Martin notes that the Lima Police Department traffic control around this campus between September of 14 and May of 2015, yes, resulted in 80 citations. Speed enforcement in particular, the traffic on North Street will be watched and enforced by the Lima Police Department this coming school year. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to present the findings of the Traffic Commission of both 2005 and 2015. Much of this data in these traffic studies is very technical. Should you have further questions, I suggest that you submit your questions to the city engineer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elstro. Next, reports of committees. Human Resources Committee.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
thank you. We held a Human Resource Committee on July 27th of this year at 5 p.m. Each of the councilors have received a copy of that report, and I would ask at this time that my report be received and filed. And approved, please.
Second.
Motion the second is to receive, file, and approve the Human Resource Committee report as submitted in writing by Councilor Lowe. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Next, the Economic and Community Development Committee.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
yes, we had our Economic Development Committee meeting on August 3rd, 2015, and I appreciate my committee, Ms. Adams and Todd Gordon. They did a great job getting this all explained, and I know all the city council got it. And I just want to make sure Pete Rose and Donald Trump was not there. But it was a great meeting, though. We got some good things going on there. Some of the work that Mr. Lowe proposed for Ms. Adams to get to us on the 14th of September in Ms. Adams. Mr. Lowe recommendation that I'd like for us to, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this Economic Development Committee report.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve the Community and Economic Development Committee report as submitted by Councilor Glenn. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries. Next, ordinance 143-15.
This is the second reading, levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that ordinance 4315 be passed on its second reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 143-15 on its second reading. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 143-15 has been passed by an 8-0 vote on second reading. Ordinance 157-15.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima, Ohio.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that 15715 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 157-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 157-15 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 158-15.
Providing for the issuance and sale of $49,000 of notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the property owner's portion in anticipation of the levy and collection of sidewalk assessments of the cost of constructing sidewalks at various locations in the city, together with all necessary appurtenances thereto, in the manner provided in Resolution 115 and Ordinance 100-15.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 158-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 158-15 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 15815 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 15915.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with GovDeals.com and to otherwise dispose of non-functional miscellaneous computer equipment.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles.
I move that ordinance 159-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 15915 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 15915 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 16015.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Bluffton Paving.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 160-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 16015 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 16015 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 16115.
Amending ordinance 4215.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 161-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 16115 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
And Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 16115 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 16215.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Ben's Construction for demolition of 328 East 4th Street.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 162-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 16215 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Ordinance 16215 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Next is miscellaneous business. Mr. Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about I was contacted by a resident at 726 North Elizabeth, Daniel DeHaven Reyes, about a situation where a tree had fallen, tree branch that sits in the medium, fallen on her car, caused damage, and she put in a claim with the city and was denied. She's brought some evidence forth to me, and so what I would like to do is I'd like to refer the situation of the damaged vehicle of Daniel DeHaven Reyes to the Public Works Committee by moral obligation.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to refer the claim as stated by Councilor Gordon to the Public Works Committee for review and consideration for payment as a moral obligation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. And I want to talk a little bit about the National Night Out. I was able to, my wife and we took my grandchild, and boy, did she have a good time, my grandchild, and so did I. But the
Keep you off those inflatable things.
yeah, they wouldn't let me on the little air rides to jump up and down, but my granddaughter enjoyed those, and I'll tell you what, I don't think we could have dragged her away from the little dog, the talking dog, on the fire truck. But it was really an enjoyable night, and I appreciate all the work that everybody put into that, and all the time that both chiefs from the fire department, the police department put into that, and being out there with everybody. So I just wanted to thank them guys for that, and as a resident, being able to go to that and enjoy that with my grandchild. And the last thing is, I just want to remind people to be good to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President.
reflection back on the National Night Out, I tell you, there was a large group of people that was there. We cooked a whole bunch of hamburgers and hot dogs. And, you know, it's really nice to have a meeting where people can get to see the fire department and the police department, and they don't have any pressure. I mean, there was several of their officers, several of the fire department there. It was just so easy to walk up to them and have a conversation. And I think that we need more of that, because we get to a point where sometimes we say things to our kids that we don't mean. We should bring forth that they shouldn't be scared of a policeman or a fireman, because they're here to help us. They're here to serve us. And that's what our city brings forth is a great fire department and a great police department. So I was fortunate enough to work with the Northside Neighborhood Association and cooking some hamburgers and hot dogs that night, and I got to see a lot of people walk through that line grabbing a hamburger or a hot dog. So it felt really good when I went home at night. A little greasy, but I felt good. I also want to mention that Northside Neighborhood is going to have their meeting on the 18th. Again, that's at St. Gerard's and the cafeteria at the church, and the cafeteria is right behind it. We really do need people to step up and get involved with neighborhood associations, because what's happening is people are so busy in their lives that they forget about what those neighborhood groups do. They do go out, just like the National Night Out, is they cooked and we served those people there. That's one of the things that they do. But if you're a neighbor in need, that's what a neighborhood association comes in to help you. If you need something done at your house that can't get accomplished by yourself, that's what a neighborhood association can do, or point you in the right direction who can. So we really need to get off our duffs, get off the couch, and go out with those neighborhood associations and help. Part of our life is being a volunteer. Part of it's about giving back. Our community is nowhere going to get any better if we just sit around and say it's someone else's responsibility. It's ours. It starts here. It starts with your guts. It starts with your heart. Give back. Because if you don't, we're all going to look at each other and say, what happened? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Lowe?
Thank you. I only got one thing. I've gotten 3 phone calls, and I got a message earlier. A lot of residents are wondering why AEP, or their electric bill, has gone up so high. It is not a contract that the city has with AEP. A lot of people are believing that, and they're posting that. That is not true. What you need to do is call the service number and talk to them about the rate that you are paying and the service provider. Again, it is not the city. We have not voted on anything. We are not contracted with AEP. My bill also spiked pretty high, and I had to make some phone calls. So just check on that, please. I just didn't want anybody to be misled. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Tevin?
A couple of things this evening. I can't believe I'm saying it, but it's almost time for back-to-school safety. And being, aware that kids are going to be walking to school and being transported to school, and we all need to be aware of that. It comes way too early, I'm sure, for the kids, and from what I was used to when I was young. The second item, and I'd ask Chief Martin to make a couple of comments if he would. I understand that the community-oriented policing officers are being deployed. And what should the community expect and as this occurs?
Well, first of all, we have selected the area where we are going to first reinitiate the neighborhood officers, and that is actually going to be in the Midway East area, and that is based on raw crime data as far as where we're having the most crime occurring, especially the most violent crime. And we are going to be making some more announcements publicly about that in the very near future. We will have the first substation, it looks like, open before the end of this month, as was promised to council back in January. And as far as what the public should expect, again, first thing we're going to have the neighborhood officers out there doing is knocking on doors and getting to meet people. And again, one of the things that we found, frankly, is that as we hit some tough financial times as a city and as a nation some years back, was that actually we became very, very efficient in terms of being able to identify the crime hotspots and putting our people, the resources, the limited resources we had in those areas. But our efficiency actually has come back to haunt us in that through that efficiency we lost those relationships. And so again, the primary responsibility of that neighborhood officer in each of the areas where they're going to be functioning will be, above all else, to start working on building those relationships back again with the people within the community. And I guess I will just take this opportunity, since I'm up here, to again thank council for all of the support that you've given us in terms of being able to return to the concept of neighborhood officers and neighborhood substations. So thank you.
Thank you for the comments, and today was the 1-year anniversary of the events in Ferguson, Missouri, and there's been a lot that's happened in our country over the last year that has caused a lot of concern to people, and I think our community should be proud that we all have made this a priority. And I look forward to these officers re-engaging with the community on a personal level and the difference that it will make in the building of those relationships and the building of that trust. So I'm very confident that with the selection process you've employed and under your leadership that this will be a big plus for our community, and look forward to great results. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to just do a quick follow-up on Councilor Tibbins' comments and the update from the chief. Appreciate the information and the startup at Midway East neighborhood area. The residents and all will welcome you and are looking forward to getting to know the officers and them getting to know the residents. So thank you. That issue that was referred this evening to the Public Works, I haven't had an opportunity to speak to the committee members, but I'd like to call a meeting for next Monday at 5:30, if that's agreeable to, okay. All right. For the subject of the,
5:30?
yeah, 5:30, if that works.
Moral obligation, Clyde?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Mr. Glenn?
Yeah, Mr. President, first of all, we had down at the Municipal Center, and we already know that they don't have a great budget at all. And it feels so good that we got good people in our community to come together. But I'd like to thank Chief Martin's daughter for giving her money up to do the floor there at the Municipal Center. And I want you to thank her. I haven't get to see her yet to thank her, but that's great that she pulled her money out of her pocket and paid for it to get it done. And the floor really needed bad. And I'm just saying how we, young people, good young people like that, we need all to work together. Because it's not going to be money there to do them things like that, to get the floor re-wax all done again, you know, 'cause you got a budget trying to keep the lights and gas on. But I appreciate her so much for doing that. Also, we're going to be doing book bags, school supplies, the 16th, this Sunday at 3 o'clock. And I thank everybody working on that, man. That just got people's calling saying, come pick up stuff. Thank you so much. We gave out 350 school uniforms Wednesday. And it was great. You know, I didn't know these uniforms was coming in. Me and my wife was out there buying some uniforms for some kids, 20 kids that was on our wish list that parents had said they needed uniforms. And the guy asked me, hey, the kids are grown. I said, yeah, we just helping the kids out in our community. And all of a sudden, I get this big old box in the house. And I don't know the guy who donated all that, but I appreciate him so much. I mean, I get this donation like that so often, but it's a blessing, and we got them all out. And most of all the uniforms, from shorts to pants and shirts. And we had kids from not just the city school came and got them, kids from all over came and got them. Just a word of mouth. and they came by the house and picked the uniforms up. So I thank him, whoever donated. I don't know who donated them. I don't know the guy, but I appreciate him so much for doing that. Also, we're going to be having hot dogs and hamburgers, and we're going to need some volunteers to help out with that. They can come out and help with that, and because you don't have to bring anything in. We're just going to make sure every kid gets the school supplies. You don't have to bring no benefit and nothing like that. And I'd like to open up for all the kids so they can have something to start school in. And I know our COP officers will be coming up next. We're going to be trying to get them located at. And I'll piggyback on Tom and Miss Adams, and they're going to be excited to see them back in our community. And they're going to be welcome to come back in the community, get to know the peoples in the neighborhood. And it's going to be really nice to hear them, walking down the street. And I always bring up Scotty Leland, because this guy was one of the great COP officers. He knew everybody in that neighborhood. He could knock on the door, sit on the porch and talk to them. And we just got to get back to the basics. And I think this is going to work, because everybody excited about it. Everybody know about it, because we had it once before. And they'll be able to get involved in neighborhoods. Sam talked about building the neighborhoods back. Yes, we got to do neighborhood association back up again. We got to start doing that too. Other thing, rallying the square. It was great this Friday. And I mean, when you see everybody together, I was so excited about it. I mean, that day, everybody was happy. We all was together, we talking, people you seen in a long time. They brought that group in, Phase 6, that everybody know about, and it brought out a lot of people. They did a really good job, though. But the main thing you seeing us all together there, we talking and communicating, and let us know on everything. I will have on a survey with the rule of 10 and pass-fail. I have that survey all done and complete by Wednesday. And this is something that I want to take out in the community and find out what they want. I mean, not what Derry Glenn want. I want to find out what the community want. And that's what we need to do sometimes. Let them find out, and let's find out what we can do in the community. It's going real great, and I'm glad a lot of folks calling and dropping them off by the house, getting them off the internet. It's great. So I appreciate all the ones doing that, and thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Glenn. Mrs. Miles?
Thank you, Mr. President. The Westgate Neighborhood Association will be meeting August 16th at 6:30 p.m., again at the Chamberlain Huckery Funeral Home. And our speaker this month is Tom Mazur. And if you don't know Tom Mazur from the regional planning, you're in for a treat. This man here, for one, he has a vast amount of knowledge here. And if he ever was to leave Lima, well, I don't know who could step into his place and be able to have all the knowledge that he has about transportation, and every grants and everything in the city here. So come out if you have never heard Tom Mazur speak. Come out on Sunday at 6:30 and hear him. You'll be in for a treat. You'll be in for a couple of laughs. You'll be in. You never know what Tom's gonna pull out his hat. So again, a great speaker planned for Sunday. I had the opportunity to attend the Stadium Park dedication, and I tell you, it did my heart good, because I know a lot of the obstacles that was involved in making that project come into fruition. And I didn't realize that it had been 10 years in the works here. I thought it's only been in the last couple of years here. But as I was standing there under that tent here, and there was clouds coming in, and then all of a sudden, the clouds went back in and the sun came out, I said, this is truly a blessing for our city to be able to see this project, to be able to come into fruition, and what it's going to do for that east side corridor. People coming into our city will be able to see that, and it really will open up things. It will be a great project in the works here for our city. And I'm appreciative of the mayor and all his diligence and persistence, and Lima City Schools and all who worked in collaboration to make this project happen. And as I was looking at the brochure that was passed out there, I want to read this quote that I thought was very, very fitting. It says, "There is immense power when a group of people with similar interests get together to work toward the same goal." And I thought that was so appropriate for not only for this project, but also for our city as a whole, as we forge ahead and try to make great things happen in our city. That it's going to take unity. None of us can do it by ourselves. It's going to take us all working together as one in order to make great projects happen. And that's exactly what happened in this project here for the Stadium Park. And I'm appreciative of it. And I hope this quote here I would love to see it on his wall someplace. I just think it's a great quote. And I wish I could quote this man's name, but it is an African name, and I will mess it up.
Mess it all up.
But it is and I went on the website and I looked at some of his other quotes, and they're wonderful. He also has a book, you know, that he's sells. But this particular, and I just want to give you a little bit of background about this man here. He had a very humble beginning in Africa. He had nothing in Africa, but now he works for some of the wealthiest people in the world on various issues concerning the management and protection of their wealth. He is currently an assistant vice president in the wealth management department of a global bank in a Fortune 500 company, where he works with new clients, you know, with a minimum of $10 million as their net worth. He is a keynote speaker, a consultant, and a catalyst for progressive change. And so I just want to thank whoever came up with that quote. Excellent. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Miles. I just have two things. Number one, just a reminder that I believe the Allen County Fair starts next Friday and Saturday, and it will be a busy area on the east side. Be patient in traffic. It'll be good practice for patience as kids are walking to school a week later. The other item, council rules during privilege of the floor don't it's recommended that council members not engage in a dialogue with speakers because it sometimes goes back and forth and gets too long. However, the speakers tonight did ask a question at the end, and that is there anything that council can do? And one of the things that I'd encourage you to do is to talk with the law director to get a clear and concise answer on the limitations that council has over that situation. And I wanted to at least direct you to the law director to get the factual limitations, okay? So, thank you. If there's nothing further, that's all I have.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that Lima City Council adjourn until August 24th at 7 p.m. in these chambers.
Second.
The motion and the second is that Lima City Council adjourn until 7 p.m. on August 24th. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries and we are adjourned.
I will